The plastic chair was a special kind of uncomfortable, the sort designed to discourage lingering. It was a stark, unyielding green, and I could feel every one of my 71 years pressing into its rigid form. I was sitting in Dr. Evans's waiting room, surrounded by the soft, weary sounds of other people's ailments. A muffled cough, the rustle of a magazine page, a low sigh. The air smelled of antiseptic and forced patience. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. I was there because my daughter, Angela, had insisted. "Mom, you need to take better care of yourself now that you're alone," she'd said, her voice layered with a concern I now understood was merely a facade. It's funny how a single moment can retroactively color every memory that came before it, turning what you thought was gold into nothing more than cleverly painted lead. I was fidgeting with the strap of my handbag, a worn leather thing Robert had given me for our 40th anniversary, when my phone vibrated on my lap. The screen lit up with a picture of Angela, her smile bright and seemingly full of love, taken just a year ago at a family barbecue. A flicker of warmth, a mother's automatic response, was quickly doused by a prickle of unease. Our calls had become routine, scheduled things, and this was not our time. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "Angela? Honey, is everything all right?" There was a beat of silence, a hollow space on the line that felt wrong. Then her voice came through, and it was like a shard of ice slipped directly into my vein. It was flat, stripped of all the familiar music a child's voice holds for a parent, no matter their age. "Mom, we're going on a trip to Europe tomorrow. I already sold your beach house and your car. We needed the money. Bye." The words landed, not as separate sentences, but as one solid, crushing weight. Sold your beach house. Your car. We needed the money. Bye. And then the line went dead. A flat, toneless dial tone hummed in my ear. I sat there, in that ugly green chair, the phone still pressed against the side of my head. The sounds of the waiting room, the coughs, the pages turning, the receptionist's murmured voice faded into a distant, muffled roar, as if I were submerged in deep water. I could feel the eyes of the other patients on me, sensing the seismic shift that had just occurred in my small world. 45 years. 45 years of raising her, of sacrificing for her, of loving her with a ferocity that defined my very existence. I had endured sleepless nights when she was teething, had swallowed my own fears to soothe hers before school exams, had held her hand through heartbreaks and celebrated her triumphs as if they were my own. I had given her every piece of myself, and she had discarded me like garbage, with a 2-minute phone call that felt more like a clinical transaction than a conversation with her mother. A memory, sharp and unbidden, flashed behind my eyes. Angela at 6 years old, her small hand trustingly tucked in mine as we crossed the street to her first day of school. The complete and utter faith in that gesture. Where had that little girl gone? Where was the woman who had held me so tightly at her father's funeral just 6 months ago, her tears wetting my shoulder? But then, something strange happened. A deep, shuddering breath filled my lungs, one I didn't realize I'd been holding. And instead of the tears that had been my constant companions since Robert left me, I felt a smile touch my lips. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. It wasn't a smile of happiness, God no. It was the smile of someone who has just been pushed to the very edge of the cliff and, in that final moment, remembers they have wings they'd forgotten how to use. Because there was something my dear, cold-hearted daughter didn't know. My name is Antonia Brooks. I'm a 71-year-old widow. And until that very moment, I thought I knew my daughter. But she, it seemed, had never truly known her mother or the man she had been married to for a lifetime. The world started to come back into focus, the sounds sharpening, the colors becoming distinct again. I lowered the phone and placed it carefully back into my handbag, my movements slow and deliberate. I became acutely aware of my own body, the steady, stubborn beat of my heart, the breath moving in and out of my lungs. For the first time in months, I didn't cry. The well of tears, which I thought was bottomless, had suddenly run dry, replaced by a calm, a stillness I hadn't felt since Robert's death. It was in that profound quiet, that eye of my personal hurricane, that I remembered. It was a memory that had been buried under an avalanche of grief and paperwork, a small, insignificant moment that had occurred just 3 days before my world first fell apart. Robert and I were in the kitchen. The morning sun was streaming through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. He was drinking his coffee, black, the way he always had. I was scrambling eggs. It was a Tuesday, I think, an utterly ordinary morning that would become sacred in its ordinariness. He had finished his cup, placed it in the sink, and then he'd turned to me, his kind, steady eyes holding mine. "Antonia," he'd said, his voice a low, familiar rumble. He'd reached into the battered leather satchel he carried to and from work for 40 years and pulled out a plain manila envelope. It wasn't thick, but it had a certain weight to it. He held it out to me. "Put this in the drawer of your dresser, the top one, on the right." I'd taken it, my fingers brushing against his. "What is it, Robert?" "More insurance papers." We'd been reviewing our policies, a morbid but necessary task as we got older. A shadow, fleeting and deep, passed behind his eyes. It was a look I couldn't quite decipher at the time, a mixture of love, worry, and a fierce protectiveness. "Just put it away, my love. If something happens to me, open it after a while. But only when you feel ready. When you really need it, promise me." I'd promised, of course. I would have promised him the moon. I'd taken the envelope, carried it to our bedroom, and tucked it into the back of the dresser drawer, behind my sweaters. I'd done it without much thought, my mind already on the day's chores, on whether we needed milk. After the funeral, in the gray, suffocating fog of my grief, with the endless arrangements and the well-meaning condolences that felt like tiny, sharp needles, I had simply forgotten it. The envelope, and Robert's strange request, had been swallowed by the enormity of my loss. But now, sitting in this doctor's office, the ghost of my daughter's cold voice still echoing in my ears, I remembered. The envelope, it was waiting for me. Right now, at this very moment, it was sitting in my dark bedroom, a silent secret tucked away behind a stack of folded cashmere. "Antonia Brooks?" The nurse's voice was cheerful, cutting through my reverie. She stood by the open door to the examination rooms, a clipboard in her hand. I looked up at her, and the smile that was on my lips felt a little less fragile. "Yes," I said, my own voice surprising me with its steadiness. "I'm ready." I stood, my knees protesting slightly, and followed her down the hallway. Dr. Evans did his examination, poking and prodding, listening to my heart and lungs. "Everything looks good, Antonia," he said, making a note on my chart. "For your age, you're in excellent health. Just remember to rest more, eat well. You've been through a lot." I nodded and smiled, the perfect picture of a compliant, elderly patient. But my mind was a million miles away from my blood pressure and cholesterol. It was back in my house, in that dresser drawer. It was turning over the coldness in Angela's voice, dissecting it, understanding it for the first time. And it was thinking of Edward, her husband, with his slick smile and eyes that never quite met mine. He had never liked me. He always saw me as an obstacle, a nuisance to be managed. I had no doubt he was the architect of this cruel plan. I left the office, the crisp autumn air hitting my face as I stepped outside. I walked slowly to the bus stop, the reality of my new situation settling around me. I no longer had a car, according to Angela. Robert's beloved Ford pickup, the one he cared for like a second child, washing it every Sunday without fail, was gone, sold. The last place where his scent still lingered on the driver's seat, a mix of Old Spice and the peppermints he always carried, was now someone else's property. The thought should have leveled me. It should have sent me spiraling back into the abyss of grief. But as I stood at the bus stop, watching the traffic flow past, I couldn't help it. That small, secret smile returned. There was something deeply, darkly poetic about all of this. My daughter, in her ruthless pursuit of a new life, believed she had left me with nothing. She thought she had reduced me to a helpless old woman, waiting for a bus, with nothing but a pittance in my bank account and a future full of uncertainty. The bus arrived with a sigh of hydraulic brakes. I climbed aboard, paid my fare, and found a seat by the window. As the city rolled by, the neat rows of houses, the bustling stores, the people rushing with their own private tragedies and joys, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had my own secret too. A secret waiting in a dresser drawer. And I was about to discover it. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that Robert, my dear, quiet, unassuming Robert, had always been a man who planned ahead. He was a bus driver for 40 years, a man who took pride in his routine, in his simple, honest life. But he was also a man who saw the cracks in the world before they spread. He saw the avarice in Edward's eyes long before I was willing to admit it. He saw the potential for a change in our daughter's heart, a shift from love to something colder and more transactional. The bus rumbled on, and I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. The journey home felt different this time. It wasn't a trip back to an empty, silent house haunted by memories. It was a journey toward a revelation. When I got home, I wouldn't make myself a cup of tea. I wouldn't turn on the television for noise. I would go straight to my room. I would open that dresser drawer. I would pull out that manila envelope, the one with my name written on the front in Robert's neat, steady handwriting. My hands trembled slightly at the thought, not from fear, but from a long-dormant sense of anticipation. I could feel it, a current running under my skin. Whatever I found inside that envelope would change everything. It would be the key to unlocking a door I didn't even know was closed. Robert hadn't just left me a widow, he had left me a map. And it was time I started reading it. The house was exactly as I had left it, filled with the quiet that only a solitary person can truly understand. I didn't bother turning on many lights. The late afternoon sun cast long, familiar shadows across the living room floor, across the furniture we had chosen together, the knickknacks we had collected over a lifetime. These shadows used to frighten me after he died, making the house feel like a cavern of loss. But now, they felt like old friends, witnesses to what was about to unfold. I walked through the stillness, my footsteps firm on the hardwood floor. I went straight to my bedroom, to the dresser that had stood in the same corner for 40 years. I opened the top drawer on the right, the one that held my sweaters. I pushed them aside, my fingers searching in the dim light. And there it was. The manila envelope, exactly where I had left it. It felt cool and smooth to the touch. I carried it to the bed, the same bed Robert and I had shared for so many years, where we had whispered our dreams and fears in the dark. I sat on the edge, the mattress dipping slightly under my weight. Outside, the sky was beginning to bruise with the onset of evening, painting the room in shades of purple and gray. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind Robert would take before telling me something important. I opened the envelope slowly, carefully, as if it were a precious relic. The sound of the paper tearing seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I reached inside and pulled out the contents. There were several documents, legal-looking papers, with official seals, bank statements, with numbers that made my head spin. And on top of it all, a letter, A handwritten letter from Robert. My eyes, which had stayed dry through my daughter's betrayal, instantly filled with tears. Seeing his handwriting, the familiar loops and slants of his pen, was like hearing his voice after a long silence. I blinked the tears away, refusing to let them blur the words. I needed to see this. I needed to understand. I unfolded the paper, my hands now trembling in earnest, and I began to read. My dear Antonia, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. Forgive me for not telling you everything while I was alive, but I wanted to protect you from worries. You have always had such a gentle heart, and I never wanted the burden of money to weigh on you. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Over the years, I invested our savings. Every bonus, every penny we scrimped and saved, I put to work. We don't just have the beach house, my love. We have 6 other properties, including the apartment building where Angela and Edward live. We also have shares in 3 companies that are worth more than you can imagine. The words swam before my eyes. I had to read the sentence about the apartment building twice. The apartment building where Angela and Edward live. He had owned it for the last 10 years? He was their silent landlord. A disbelieving laugh, half-sob, escaped my lips. You are rich, my love. You always were rich in all the ways that truly matter, but now you are on paper, too. I kept it a secret because I didn't want Angela to know about our real financial situation. You know our daughter, Antonia. If she knew we had so much, her attitude would change. I wanted her to love us for who we are, not for what we have. The irony was so perfect, so devastating, it stole my breath. Our daughter had discarded us, thinking we had nothing, when in reality, we had everything. She had sold my house, my car, to fund her European adventure, not knowing that the very roof over her head belonged to me. I looked through the other documents, my fingers tracing the raised seals, the typed words that spelled out a reality I could never have dreamed of. Deeds to houses in neighborhoods I knew, a condo downtown, a small motel on the coast. And yes, the deed for the 20-story apartment building, held in the name of a company I'd never heard of, Robert Investments, Incorporated, and according to the papers, I was the sole heir. The sole owner. Robert, my bus driver husband, had been a brilliant secret investor. He had multiplied our humble savings in silence, building an empire while I was busy building a home. He had done it all for me, for us, for a future he knew he might not be here to see. I sat there for a long time. As the room grew dark around me, the documents spread out on the bedspread like a map of a new world. A world where I was not a victim. A world where I held all the power. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through the house, my house, touching the old furniture Angela had always criticized for being outdated. I looked at the family photos on the walls, stopping at one in particular. Angela was 5, sitting on Robert's lap, her head thrown back in a fit of laughter, his arms wrapped securely around her. Where had that man gone? Where had that little girl gone? The question wasn't filled with sadness anymore. It was filled with a new, steely determination. The game had changed. No, scratch that. A game I didn't even know I was playing had just been revealed, and I now held all the winning cards. My daughter thought she had left me with nothing. But what she didn't know was that her father had left me with everything, and I was just beginning to understand how to use it. The world outside my bedroom window softened from deep indigo to the pale, watery gray of pre-dawn. I hadn't slept a wink. I hadn't even tried. The documents from Robert's envelope were spread across the bed, a chaotic archipelago of paper that represented a continent of hidden truth. I had read his letter a dozen times, until the words were etched onto the back of my eyelids. You are rich, my love. You always were rich. I had pored over the deeds, the bank statements with their staggering balances, the stock certificates for companies whose names I recognized from the business section of the newspaper. My mind, which had felt so foggy and slow for months, was now operating with a terrifying crystalline clarity. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. It was as if Robert had not just left me a fortune, but had handed me a key that unlocked a part of my own brain I never knew existed. Sitting in the growing light, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's secret life, I felt a strange duality. Part of me was still Antonia Brooks, the grieving widow, the woman who had just been callously betrayed by her only child. That woman wanted to curl into a ball and weep for the sheer, heartbreaking irony of it all. But the other part, the part that was growing stronger with each passing minute, was someone new. She was the sole beneficiary of Robert Investments Incorporated. She was a woman of property and means. She was, for the first time in her life, truly and completely in control. The calm I had felt on the bus yesterday had solidified into a core of cold, hard resolve. Angela's voice, so devoid of warmth, replayed in my mind, but it no longer had the power to shatter me. Instead, it felt like a recording, a piece of evidence in a case I was now building. I looked at the deed for the apartment building where she lived with Edward. The building I owned. The sheer, audacious poetry of it was enough to take my breath away. They were living in a castle they believed was theirs, all the while standing on land that belonged to the queen they had just deposed. I carefully gathered the papers, my movements reverent. This was not just a financial inheritance. It was Robert's final message to me, his last act of love and protection. He had seen a storm coming that I was blind to, and he had built me an ark. I needed to honor that. I needed to be worthy of the faith he had in me. I found an old leather briefcase in the back of Robert's closet, the one he used for important documents. It still smelled faintly of him. I placed everything inside, the envelope, the deeds, the statements, his letter. I clicked the brass clasps shut. The sound was definitive, like the cocking of a gun. The briefcase felt heavy in my hand, solid. It was my shield and my sword. The house was still and silent as I moved through it to the kitchen. I made a pot of coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me. As it brewed, I stood at the sink, looking out at the backyard. Robert's bird feeder was still there, a squirrel hanging upside down from it, scattering seeds. Life went on. The world continued to turn. But my axis had just been permanently recalibrated. I took my coffee and the briefcase to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one we used to pay bills. I sat down, the worn wooden chair groaning in protest. I had a plan, but it was still nebulous, a ghost of an idea. I knew I needed legal counsel. I needed someone who could translate these documents into action, and I knew exactly who to call. Mr. Peterson had handled Robert's will. He was a man in his late 50s, with a quiet, earnest demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. He had been at the funeral, had pressed my hand between both of his, and told me that Robert was one of the finest men he had ever known. "If you need anything, Antonia, anything at all, do not hesitate to call," he'd said. At the time, I'd thought it was just a polite formality. Now, I understood it might have been something more. Had Robert spoken to him? Had he hinted at this other life? I waited until 9 a.m. precisely before dialing his office number. My hand was steady. Peterson and Associates. A crisp, young female voice answered. "Yes, hello, this is Antonia Brooks. I'd like to speak with Mr. Peterson, please." "One moment, Mrs. Brooks." There was a click, and then his familiar, calm voice came on the line. "Antonia, it's good to hear from you. How are you holding up?" The concern in his voice was genuine, and for a moment it threatened to undo my newfound composure. I took a slow sip of coffee. "I'm managing, Charles. Thank you for asking." I used his first name, as Robert always had. It established a familiarity, a connection. I need to see you. Urgently. I've found some documents among Robert's things that I don't quite understand. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just a fraction of a second too long. Did he know? Of course, he said, his tone shifting subtly into professional mode. I have an opening at 11 this morning. Would that work? That would be perfect. I'll see you then. I hung up the phone and leaned back in the chair. Phase 1 was in motion. Now I had to prepare. I went upstairs and took a shower, the hot water washing away the last remnants of the sleepless night. I dressed with more care than I had in months. I chose a simple, navy blue dress, elegant and understated. I fixed my hair and applied a little makeup, covering the shadows under my eyes. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a helpless widow. I saw a woman with a secret. I saw a woman with a purpose. The drive to Mr. Peterson's office was a journey through a world that looked the same but felt entirely different. I saw the city with new eyes. That coffee shop on the corner, I wondered if the building was one of mine. That small park where mothers pushed their children on swings? I could probably buy it if I wanted to. The power was not in the act of buying, but in the knowledge that I could. It was a silent, thrumming energy that coursed through me. Mr. Peterson's office was in an old, dignified building downtown, all marble floors and dark wood paneling. It spoke of stability and discretion. His secretary ushered me directly into his office, a spacious room with a large window overlooking the city. He stood up from behind his massive oak desk, coming around to greet me. He looked exactly as I remembered him, kind eyes, a slightly receding hairline, a well-tailored suit. Antonia, he said, taking both my hands in his. You look well. Thank you, Charles. It's good to see you. He gestured to the plush chairs in front of his desk. Please, sit. You said you found some documents. I placed the briefcase on my lap, clicking the clasps open. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Yes. Robert gave me an envelope before he died. He told me to open it when I was ready. I met his gaze. I was ready yesterday. I handed him the contents, starting with Robert's letter. I watched his face as he read it. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he was too much of a professional to let his shock show. He finished the letter and looked at me, his expression unreadable. May I? He asked, gesturing to the other documents. Please. He spent the next 10 minutes in silence, scanning the deeds, the bank statements, the corporate papers. He would occasionally make a small, non-committal sound in the back of his throat. Finally, he set the last paper down and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers under his chin. Antonia, he began, his voice low and serious. This is much more than I ever imagined. Robert was a very, very smart man. I'm beginning to understand that, I said, my voice dry. Look, he said, leaning forward and tapping a particular document. According to this, you are the sole owner of Robert Investments, Incorporated, which holds the title to 6 properties, including the Bayview Apartments. He looked at me. That's the building where your daughter lives. I know. And these bank accounts, the numbers are substantial. I saw. He sat back again, studying me. I have to admit, I'm a little surprised. Robert and I discussed his will, of course, but he never indicated the extent of his assets. He was remarkably discreet. He wanted to protect me, I said softly. He didn't want me to worry, and he didn't want Angela to know. Charles nodded slowly, a look of understanding dawning on his face. Ah, I see. But now, I continued, my voice gaining a new firmness. There is a problem, a rather urgent one. I told him everything. The phone call from the doctor's office. The cold, brutal announcement. The sale of the beach house and the truck. The condescending follow-up call about my 30% share. I told him about watching them get into the cab, laughing, without a backward glance. I kept my voice level, factual, as if I were reporting on something that had happened to someone else. I did not cry. I did not waver. When I finished, Charles's face was a mask of professional neutrality, but I could see the anger in the tight line of his mouth. "I see," he said again, the words laden with new meaning. "So, Charles, what I need to know is, what can I do legally? These documents are legitimate?" "They are completely legitimate," he affirmed. "You are the rightful owner of all these assets. And the sale of the beach house." He shook his head. "It was illegal. Angela had no right to sell it. We can get it back immediately, and we can also proceed with legal action against her for fraud." The word fraud hung in the air between us, cold and sharp. I could see the path laid out before me. Lawsuits, police reports, a very public, very messy legal battle that would end with my daughter in handcuffs. It was the obvious path, the just path. But it wasn't the one I wanted. "No," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. Charles blinked. "I'm sorry." "No legal action. Not like that. I don't want to press charges." He looked perplexed. "Antonia, with all due respect, what she did was a serious crime. She stole from you. She manipulated you. I know what she did." I interrupted, my tone leaving no room for argument. "But I want to handle this another way. I want everything to remain a secret for now. Can you help me with that?" He looked at me with open curiosity now, his head tilted. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I took a deep breath, laying out the nascent plan that had been forming in my mind all morning. "I need you to discreetly get the beach house back. Do whatever is necessary to nullify that sale without a public scandal. And I need you to help me gain real, direct control of all my properties, especially the Bayview building. But no one can know I am behind it. Not yet." He was silent for a long moment, processing this. I could see the wheels turning in his legal mind, assessing the feasibility, the potential pitfalls. Finally, a slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but one of respect. "It will be a process," he said carefully. "It will take a few weeks. We'll need to move quietly, use certain legal channels that avoid unnecessary attention. But yes, it's completely feasible." "Perfect," I said. "And what about the truck?" he asked. "The truck is more complicated," I admitted, remembering the power of attorney Angela had tricked me into signing. "But I want that back too. Everything they took." "We can try. Proving coercion or deception after the fact is challenging, but not impossible." "Then let's try." He nodded, making a note on a legal pad. "I'll start the proceedings today. I'll be in touch with updates. You have my absolute discretion, Antonia. You are my client." "Thank you, Charles." I stood up, feeling the weight of the briefcase in my hand, but it felt lighter now. The burden was being shared. He walked me to the door. "Antonia," he said as I was about to leave. "May I ask, why? Why not just take back what's yours through the normal channels? Why the secrecy?" I turned and looked at him, the image of my daughter's arrogant, condescending smile clear in my mind. "Because this isn't just about reclaiming property, Charles. It's about education. My daughter thought she was so clever. She thought she had left me with nothing. I want her to learn, in a way she will never forget, what it truly means to have nothing, and what it truly means to have everything." The understanding in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. I had chosen the right ally. When I left his office, I felt as if I were walking on air. The marble floor seemed to buoy my steps. I walked through the downtown streets, not as a grieving widow, but as a general surveying her domain. The people rushing past me, the businessmen on their phones, the shoppers with their bags, they were all actors in a play, and I had just been handed the script. I decided to walk for a while, to feel the sun on my face and the power in my veins. I passed a fancy boutique, the kind Angela loved. In the window was a garish, glittering handbag that probably cost more than Robert's first car. I thought of Angela's expensive carry-on, the one she'd loaded into the cab. She valued the wrong things. She measured worth in labels and luxury. Robert and I had measured it in love, in shared memories, in quiet mornings with coffee and toast. And now, I was going to teach her the difference. Not with a lecture, not with a lawsuit, but with experience. I was going to let her live in the world she had created for me, a world of scarcity and uncertainty. And then, when she finally understood the value of what she had thrown away, I would reveal the truth. I found myself standing in front of the Bayview Apartments. It was a sleek, modern building, all glass and steel. It towered over me, a monument to a life I had financed without their knowledge. I stood there for a long time, just looking up. Somewhere in that building, in an apartment I owned, were the remnants of my daughter's life, the life she had chosen over me. A doorman in a crisp uniform stood by the entrance, watching me with mild curiosity. I wondered if he would recognize me. I doubted it. Angela had never been eager to have her old-fashioned mother visit her sleek modern home. I didn't feel anger standing there. I didn't feel pain. I felt a profound sense of purpose. This building, this symbol of their perceived success, was my ground zero. This was where the lesson would begin. I turned and walked away, heading for the bus stop. I no longer had a car, according to my daughter. So I would take the bus. I would play my part. I would be the poor, abandoned widow everyone expected me to be. I would nod and smile when the neighbors offered their pity. I would live a small, quiet life, but it would all be a performance, a carefully constructed illusion. Because while everyone saw a helpless old woman, I was, in fact, the puppet master, and I was just beginning to pull the strings. The bus ride home from Mr. Peterson's office was a study in surreal normalcy. I sat among tired shop assistants and students with headphones, my leather briefcase resting on my lap. It contained a fortune, yet to the outside world, I was just another elderly woman on public transport. The duality of my existence was intoxicating. I watched the cityscape slide by, and for the first time, I saw it not just as a collection of streets and buildings, but as a chessboard. And I was no longer a pawn. I had been quietly promoted to queen. When I arrived back in my neighborhood, the shift was immediate. The air felt different here, thicker with familiarity and the gentle, suffocating weight of other people's perceptions. I was no longer the anonymous woman on the bus. I was Antonia Brooks, the recent widow, the one whose daughter had callously left her. I could feel the narrative that had been woven around me in my absence, a tapestry of pity and whispered judgments. It was time to step into the role they had written for me. My first test came almost immediately. Aurora was in her front garden, wrestling with a determined weed that had sprung up between her prized roses. Aurora, my lifelong neighbor, and the unofficial news conduit of our street. She saw everything, knew everything, and, God love her, shared everything. She straightened up as I approached, wiping her forehead with the back of her glove. Her eyes, always so full of life and curiosity, now held a soft, mournful gleam when they landed on me. "Antonia dear," she called out, her voice a little too bright, a little too careful. "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" This was the opening line in our new play. I allowed my shoulders to slump just a fraction. I let a sigh escape my lips, one that was only partly acted. The fatigue was real. The cause was not what she believed. "I'm managing, Aurora, one day at a time." I offered a small, wobbly smile, the kind that suggests bravery in the face of overwhelming sorrow. She came closer, leaning on her garden fork. I saw the cab yesterday, loaded with suitcases. So, it's true then? Angela's gone to Europe? Yes, I said, my voice soft. She and Edward. They have business plans over there. Aurora's lips tightened into a thin line of disapproval she couldn't quite hide. And they just left you here, all alone? The unspoken question hung in the air. After everything you've been through? I'll be fine, I said, injecting a note of frail optimism into my tone. I've always been a survivor. But how will you manage, sweetie? She pressed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We all know Robert didn't. Well, he wasn't a man for flashy things. He didn't leave much behind, did he? If you only knew, I thought, the words a silent, powerful mantra in my mind. I looked down at my sensible shoes, playing the part perfectly. We'll see. Angela said she left me some money from the sale of a few things. It should help for a little while. Aurora's face was a picture of compassionate outrage. She sold your things? Oh, Antonia. She reached out and patted my arm. You know where I am if you need anything. A hot meal, help with the groceries, you just have to ask. You're very kind, Aurora, really. But I'll be all right. I gave her another one of my brave little widow's smiles and continued down the path to my own front door. The performance had begun. And it was a performance that would be repeated, with slight variations, over the next few weeks. The butcher, Mr. Gable, gave me an extra thick chop by mistake. The baker, Mrs. Donnelly, slipped an extra loaf into my bag from yesterday's batch. The lady at the corner store refused to let me pay for my milk. Each act of charity was a tiny dagger, a confirmation of my supposed helplessness. And each time, I smiled, I thanked them, I played my part. But inside, a part of me, the new, steel-core Antonia, observed it all with a detached, almost clinical fascination. I was living a double life, and I was surprisingly good at it. My real life happened behind closed doors. In the quiet of my kitchen, with Robert's briefcase open on the table. Mr. Peterson called me every few days with updates, his voice a calm, professional counterpoint to the dramatic tension of my days. Mrs. Brooks, I've filed the preliminary motions to nullify the sale of the beach house. The buyers were understandably upset, but they were also innocent parties. They've been fully reimbursed from the holding account, and the title is being transferred back to you. It should be official by the end of the week. Excellent, Mr. Peterson. And the building? The Bayview? That's more complex. Technically, you've always been the owner through the corporation, but we need to execute a series of administrative transfers to give you direct operational control. It involves changing the registered agent and updating the corporate minutes to reflect your sole ownership. It's paperwork, but it's delicate paperwork. We have to be meticulous to avoid raising any flags. I'd estimate another 2 to 3 weeks. Perfect. Keep me informed. Each conversation was a piece of my armor being hammered into place. The beach house was mine again. Soon, the very roof over my daughter's head would be unquestionably mine. The power was no longer an abstract concept, it was becoming a legal, documented reality. It was during this time of quiet reclamation that I decided to test the boundaries of my new role. I needed to see the stage upon which the next act of my daughter's drama would play out. I needed to see the beach house. I took the bus to the coast, the same route Robert and I had traveled hundreds of times, laden with coolers and beach towels and the happy, chaotic noise of family vacations. The journey was a ghost train of memories. I saw the old ice cream parlor where Angela always demanded a double scoop, The roadside stand where Robert would buy fresh corn. The bend in the road where the first glimpse of the ocean would make us all cheer. Each landmark was a stitch in the tapestry of our life together, a tapestry Angela had tried to sell for scrap. When I got off the bus, the salt tang in the air was a physical blow, so saturated with memory it made my chest ache. I walked the familiar 2 blocks, my heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm in my ears. And then, there it was, our sanctuary. The cream-colored cottage with the wraparound porch Robert had built with his own hands, the shuttered windows facing the sea. It looked exactly the same, yet utterly different. It was no longer just a house, it was a symbol of what had been taken and what had been restored. I didn't cross the street. I didn't have the right, not yet, not in the light of day. Instead, I sat on the curb across the street, like a pilgrim at a shrine. I watched the way the sun caught the weather vane on the roof, the way the hydrangeas Robert had planted for me were still blooming by the steps, now joined by a few potted plants the recent buyers had left behind. I let the memories wash over me, not with the devastating grief of before, but with a sharp, clarifying pain. I remembered Angela at 15, sulking on that porch because we wouldn't let her go to a party in the city. I remembered her at 20, bringing her first serious boyfriend here, her eyes shining with pride and nerves. I remembered Robert, forever with a tool in his hand, forever fixing, improving, loving this place into being. I was so lost in the past that I didn't notice the man approaching until he was almost upon me. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I looked up. He was an older gentleman, perhaps a few years younger than me, with a kind, weathered face. He had come from the house. My house. I offered a faint smile. "Yes, thank you. I'm just remembering. I knew the former owners." His expression shifted to one of shared commiseration. "Ah, yes, a shame about what happened. They told us the elderly lady was very sick, needed to sell fast. We thought it was a steal, but it turns out the sale wasn't legal. We had to give the house back." The words were like a physical slap. The elderly lady was very sick. So that was the story. That was the lie she had used to facilitate her theft. She hadn't just sold my house. She had painted me as a feeble, dying burden to do it. The coldness of it, the calculated cruelty, took my breath away. "Did you know them personally?" he asked. "No," I lied smoothly, the performer taking the stage once more. "We did everything through intermediaries, but they told us the daughter was handling everything because the mother couldn't." He shook his head. "What a sad situation. If you only knew how sad it really was," I thought, the steel inside me growing colder, harder. "Well, I'm glad you didn't lose your money," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Yes. Luckily, everything worked out well. Although, now we have to look for another house. We liked this one a lot." I left him there, standing in front of my home, and walked back to the bus stop. The heaviness in my heart wasn't for the lost house, I had that back. It was for the lost daughter. The lie about my illness was the final, unforgivable proof. To Angela, I wasn't a person with feelings and a history. I was an obstacle, a story to be used, a problem to be solved with a lie and a quick sale. That night, I called Mr. Peterson. The calm, strategic part of me was now fully in command. "Mr. Peterson, I need you to help me with something else." "Of course, Mrs. Brooks. I want to get Robert's truck back, too." There was a pause on the line. "That will be more difficult. The truck was in your name, but your daughter had a power of attorney that allowed her to sell it." "How is that possible?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I just needed to hear it confirmed. "Apparently, you signed that power of attorney a few months ago after your husband's death. Don't you remember?" There it was, the moment it all began. A vague memory surfaced through the fog of my grief. Angela, bringing me a stack of papers, her voice soothing, insistent. Just some forms for the bank, Mom, to make things easier with Dad's accounts. Nothing to worry about. Just sign here and here. I had been so lost, so trusting. I had signed my life away without a second thought. I understand, Mr. Peterson. Is there any way to get it back? We can try, but it will be complicated. We would need to prove that you signed that power of attorney under deception or coercion. Let's do it, I said, my voice firm. I want to get back everything they took from me. The following weeks settled into a strange, bifurcated routine. My mornings belonged to the performance. I was the pitied widow doing her small shopping, smiling her sad smiles, accepting the world's condescending kindness. But my afternoons belonged to the strategist. I would sit at the kitchen table with Robert's documents, cross-referencing them with notes from Mr. Peterson. I was learning the language of my new life deeds, titles, corporate structures, investment portfolios. I discovered that the Bayview apartments weren't just a source of rental income. The land itself was in a neighborhood that was rapidly appreciating. Robert hadn't just saved money, he had invested in the future of the city itself, and through Mr. Peterson's discreet investigations, I learned more about Edward. The debts were even worse than I'd imagined. He had taken out loans with multiple banks, using the apartment as collateral, blissfully unaware that he was committing fraud with every signature. The house of cards he had built was towering, and it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. I didn't have to lift a finger to punish him. He was doing a fine job of it, himself. Then, one Friday morning, Mr. Peterson called with the news I had been waiting for. Mrs. Brooks, I have good news. We've finished all the paperwork. You now have total control of all your properties. The corporate veil is intact, but you are the undisputed decision-maker. I also managed to retrieve Robert's truck. The buyer was an acquaintance, and when I explained the situation, he agreed to return it in exchange for a small compensation. It's in a secure garage downtown. A wave of pure, unadulterated triumph washed over me. It was done. The reclamation was complete. I owned it all again. Every brick, every blade of grass, every memory. Excellent work, Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice cool and steady. Now, I need you to help me with one more thing. What is that? I want you to send a letter to my daughter. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear his legal mind racing. What kind of letter? An eviction notice. The silence this time was profound. Mrs. Brooks, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Are you sure you want to do this? Completely sure, I replied, my gaze falling on the family photo on the wall, the one of a laughing Angela on Robert's lap. She decided I wasn't important in her life. Now she's going to find out how important I really am. I understand. Do you want me to send it to Europe? No, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. It wasn't the brave, sad smile of the widow. It was the smile of the queen, moving her piece into position. I want you to give it to her when she gets back. I have a feeling it's going to be very soon. I wasn't wrong. The threads of Edward's deception were pulling taut. The performance was about to get a lot more interesting. The news arrived not with a dramatic phone call, but through the neighborhood's most reliable, if unofficial, news service, Aurora. She came bustling over to my fence the very next afternoon, her face alight with the grim excitement of someone bearing tragic, yet fascinating, news. I was in the front garden, pretending to tend to Robert's rose bushes, another part of my carefully constructed performance of a woman simply passing the time, a woman with nothing else to occupy her days. Antonia, she said, her voice a hushed, dramatic whisper, even though there was no one else around. You will not believe what I just heard. I looked up, wiping a gloved hand across my brow, feigning the weary curiosity expected of me. "What is it, Aurora?" She leaned in closer, the wooden fence post groaning under her weight. "It's about Edward, my brother-in-law, you know, the one who works at the First National downtown. He told me they're investigating some loans Edward took out. Big ones." I allowed my eyes to widen just enough. Loans? What for? That's just it. He used the apartment he and Angela live in as collateral. "But get this," she said, pausing for maximum effect. "It turns out the apartment isn't even his to put up. Can you believe the nerve?" I could, in fact, believe it completely. It was the inevitable conclusion of a plan I had seen unfolding in legal documents and Mr. Peterson's reports for weeks. But I shook my head, a perfect picture of bewildered concern. "How is that possible? I thought they owned it." "So did everyone," Aurora exclaimed. "But apparently not. The paperwork is a mess. And the word is, Angela didn't know a thing about it. She's going to have to come back from Europe to sort out this mess. What a complicated situation." I made a sympathetic clucking sound with my tongue. Poor Angela, to have all this happen while she's so far from home. Poor Angela, Aurora snorted, her sympathy for me overriding any for my daughter. "The worst part is, apparently Edward lied to her about the whole European business. There was no business. He just wanted to escape the debts he had here. He used the money from your house to fund his escape." I let my shoulders slump, looking down at the rose bush as if it held all the answers. "What a terrible mess," I murmured, the words tasting like victory on my tongue. Perfect. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had foreseen. The trap that Edward had built for himself was snapping shut, and Angela, who had trusted him so blindly, was about to be caught in its jaws. She had sacrificed me, her own mother, for this man, and now she was discovering. The foundation of their new life was not just cracked, but completely hollow. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, the steam rising in the cool night air. I looked up at the stars, a habit I'd formed after Robert died. He used to say they were the souls of people who had lived full lives, watching over their families. If that was true, then he was up there, his steady gaze fixed on me. I could almost feel his presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet, approving force. His plan, our plan now, was working. "Thank you, my love," I whispered into the stillness. "Thank you for taking care of me, even after your death." The next morning, the call came from Mr. Peterson. His voice was brisk, professional, but I could hear the underlying satisfaction in it. He had become more than just my lawyer, he was my co-conspirator, and he was enjoying the intricate dance of justice we were orchestrating. "Mrs. Brooks, I have some news. Your daughter just arrived in the country. She's at the airport, alone." "Alone?" I repeated, ensuring I sounded surprised. "Yes. Apparently, Edward stayed behind in Europe. There are rumors they had a very significant falling out." I felt a cold sliver of satisfaction. The first domino had fallen. "I see. Did you send the letter?" "I'm having it delivered by courier to the Bayview building this afternoon. The doorman will ensure she receives it. Personally, she should have it in her hands by tomorrow morning." I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, the heart of the home I had built with Robert. A mix of nervous energy and cold anticipation coursed through me. After weeks of silent planning, of watching and waiting from the shadows, the moment for the first real tangible move had finally arrived. Angela was back, broken and desperate, and she was about to receive her first official lesson in consequences. I didn't have to wait long for confirmation. Aurora, true to form, was at my door the following day, her eyes wide. "Antonia, your daughter came back last night. I saw her go into the building with just one suitcase." She looked terrible, dear, just awful, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, as if she'd been crying the whole flight. I invited her in, playing my part. Oh dear, poor thing. And that's not all, Aurora continued, accepting a cup of tea. Something strange happened. When the doorman asked her for her keys, she didn't have them. She had to ask the superintendent to let her in with the emergency copy. I raised an eyebrow, a perfectly executed gesture of mild curiosity. Interesting. It was more than interesting, it was telling. Edward had the keys, he had no intention of returning. Angela was not just emotionally abandoned, she was physically locked out of the life she thought she had. She was adrift, and the only port she had left was the one she had so carelessly set sail from, me. Mr. Peterson called that same afternoon. Mrs. Brooks, the letter was delivered an hour ago. The doorman confirmed that your daughter received it in person. Perfect, I said, the word feeling solid and final. How long did we give her? 30 days to vacate the premises as per the legal standard for this type of notice. He paused, and I could hear the faint rustle of papers. But Mrs. Brooks, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? She is your daughter, after all. His question was a formality, a last check on his professional conscience. My answer was ready. Mr. Peterson, my daughter kicked me out of my own life with a 2-minute phone call. She sold my things without asking. She treated me like an inconvenient piece of furniture that was taking up too much space. Now, I said, my voice as calm and steady as the deep ocean, she is going to learn that actions have consequences. Not the consequences of a court of law, but the consequences of a broken heart and a betrayed trust. This is merely the first lesson. I understand, he replied, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. I just wanted to make sure you had considered all the implications. I have considered them, Mr. Peterson, I said, my gaze sweeping over the comfortable, familiar room. All of them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't plagued by anxiety or guilt, but by a kind of grim creative energy. I lay awake in the dark, imagining the scene in that sleek, modern apartment I owned. I pictured Angela finding the formal, legal envelope. I saw her opening it, her tired mind struggling to process the words. Eviction, notice. The initial confusion, the slow dawning disbelief, then the cold, clenching panic. She would think it was a mistake, a scam. She would call the management company, only to be told that everything was in perfect order, that the owner, Robert Investments, Incorporated, was well within its rights. She would be trapped, caught between Edward's debts and her own sudden homelessness. And through it all, she would have no one to turn to. No one but me. The phone rang at 8 the next morning, as if she had been waiting for the sun to rise to make the call. The sound was sharp and insistent in the quiet house. I let it ring 3 times, taking a deep, centering breath. The performer was stepping onto the stage for her most important scene yet. I picked up the receiver. Hello, Mom. Her voice was a broken thing, stripped of all its former coldness, raw with a desperation I had never heard before. Mom, I need to talk to you urgently. I kept my voice soft, deliberately calm. Good morning, honey. How was Europe? Mom, I don't have time for that right now. The words tumbled out in a frantic rush. I received a very strange letter yesterday. It says I have to vacate my apartment in 30 days. It must be a mistake, right? Do you know anything about this? I could picture her, clutching the eviction notice, her knuckles white. An eviction notice, how strange. From whom? From a company I've never heard of. It's called, wait, let me find the letter. I heard the rustle of paper. Robert Investments, Incorporated. Do you know this company? A slow, private smile spread across my face. Robert had used his own name. How perfectly, beautifully poetic. No, honey, I've never heard that name. Are you sure the letter is legitimate? That's what I want to find out. Mom, I need you to help me. I don't know what to do. Edward left me in Europe. He ran off with another woman, and now I come back to this. I don't understand what's happening. There it was, the confirmation, delivered in a sob. Edward had abandoned her. He had taken the last of the money and the last of her dignity and vanished. Poor Angela. She had sacrificed her family for a worthless man, and now she had nothing, nothing but me. I poured every ounce of manufactured sympathy I could muster into my voice. I'm so sorry, honey. Where are you now? I'm in the apartment, but I don't know for how long. Mom. Her voice cracked, a dam about to break. Can I come see you? I need to. I need to talk to someone. I don't have anyone else. The irony was so perfect it was almost divine. Now that the man for whom she had discarded me was gone, she remembered she had a mother. The lifeline she had so carelessly severed was the only one left floating in the wreckage of her life. Of course, honey, I said, my voice a gentle, welcoming harbor. Come over whenever you want. I'm on my way. I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. The performance of a lifetime was about to begin. I had to be perfect. I went upstairs and changed into my most conservative, washed-out gray dress, the kind a defeated, poor widow would wear. I tied my hair back in a simple, unassuming bun and carefully wiped away any trace of the calculated determination from my face. I practiced looking worried, resigned, soft. When Angela arrived, she needed to see exactly what she expected to see. A vulnerable, loving mother, a safe haven in her storm. She could not see the architect of that storm. About an hour later, a cab pulled up outside. I watched from the window as she got out. The sight of her gave me a genuine jolt. The woman who emerged from the taxi was a ghost of the confident, cold daughter who had left. She had lost a noticeable amount of weight. Her clothes, once so sharp and expensive, now hung on her frame, wrinkled and neglected. Her face was pale and drawn, with deep, bruise-like circles under her red-rimmed eyes. She looked utterly broken. I opened the door before she could ring the bell. She stood on the porch, a single suitcase at her feet, her posture slumped. "Mom," she said, and for a fleeting second, I thought she might actually fall into my arms. But she stopped, a painful hesitation in her movement, as if she suddenly remembered the chasm she had dug between us. "Come in, honey," I said, stepping aside. "Do you want some coffee?" "Yes, please," she mumbled, her voice small. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had first read Robert's letter and begun my silent war. Now, it was a peace table, but the peace was a carefully constructed illusion. Angela looked tiny in the chair, dwarfed by her own shame and desperation, just like the little girl who used to confess her minor childhood transgressions at this very spot. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug I gave her. "Mom, I'm so sorry for the way I left. I know I didn't treat you well." I reached across the table and patted her hand, a gesture that felt alien and staged. "It's in the past, honey." "No, it's not." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I treated you badly, I said horrible things, and now," her voice broke completely. "Now I have no one." I let the silence hang for a moment, a soft, accepting silence. What happened with Edward? The story poured out of her then, a torrent of humiliation and betrayal. He had left her for a waitress. There was no business. It was all a lie to escape his debts, debts he had hidden from her, debts he had even taken out in her name. "He forged my signature, Mom," she whispered, the horror of it still fresh. "When I married him, I gave him some documents for our joint account. I never thought, I never dreamed. Do you have any way to prove you didn't know?" I asked, playing the part of the concerned but legally naive mother. I don't know. It's all so complicated. The banks say that since we were married, I'm responsible for all his debts anyway. And on top of that, this eviction notice. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a childlike fear. Mom, I don't know what to do. I don't have money. I don't have a job. I don't have anywhere to live. She began to cry in earnest, real, gut-wrenching sobs of genuine despair. And for a single treacherous moment, my mother's heart, the one that had loved her unconditionally for 45 years, softened. The instinct to hug her, to rock her, to tell her that Mommy would make everything all right, was a physical ache in my chest. But then I remembered. I remembered the cold, flat tone of her voice on the phone. I've sold your beach house and your car. I remembered the ease with which she had discarded me. I remembered the lie about my illness. The moment passed, leaving behind the cold, hard steel of my resolve. Did you talk to a lawyer about the letter? I asked, keeping my voice gently practical. I don't have money for a lawyer, Mom. We spent all the money in Europe. Edward took what little was left when he ran off with that woman. She looked down at her hands. So, what are you going to do? She took a shaky breath, the question I had been waiting for, finally hovering in the air between us. After everything, after kicking me out of my own life, after selling my things, after treating me like garbage, she now wanted me to rescue her. She was looking to the very victim she had created to save her from the consequences of her own actions. I don't know, she whispered. I thought maybe I could stay with you for a while. Just until I find a job and can get a small place to live. I looked at her, at the broken woman my daughter had become, and I gave her the answer she was praying for. I gave her the lifeline. Of course, honey, I said, my voice dripping with manufactured compassion. This will always be your home. The look on her face was a devastating mixture of shock, relief, and shame. Really, Mom? After everything that happened? You are my daughter, Angela, I said, layering my words with a profound, sorrowful love. That will never change. She got up from her chair, and this time she did hug me. It was a desperate, clinging embrace, the hug of a drowning person who has just been thrown a rope. I hugged her back, my arms encircling her thin, trembling frame. But it was not the unconditional, all-forgiving embrace of a mother. There was a calculation in it, a strategy. This was not a reunion, it was a tactical maneuver. She was now inside my walls. The first part of my plan was complete. Thank you, Mom, she sobbed into my shoulder. I promise I'll find a job soon. I won't be a burden. Don't worry about that now, I soothed, stroking her hair. Rest. Recover. And then we'll see what your options are. She left that afternoon to get the rest of her things from the apartment. I stayed in the kitchen, the silence settling back around me. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand perfectly steady. It had been so easy. She had come to me exactly as I had planned, broken, desperate, and utterly devoid of suspicion. To her, I was still the poor, abandoned mother, the safe harbor in her storm. But the storm was just beginning. Having her live with me would give me the perfect opportunity for the next phase of her education. I was going to let her settle in, let her feel safe, let her believe she had found a refuge in my modest, struggling home. And then, when she was least expecting it, I was going to teach her the profound, life-altering difference between being poor by circumstance and being poor by consequence. The decision, once made, seemed to harden Angela. The fragile, weeping woman was receding, replaced by someone with a grim, single-minded purpose. The jewels were no longer heirlooms, they were assets. She spent the next several days on the phone, researching jewelers, making appointments, her voice taking on a brisk, business-like tone I hadn't heard since before Robert's death. It was the voice she used for her charity committee meetings. now repurposed for the grim business of her own financial salvage. I watched her, this new, desperate version of my daughter, with a complex mix of pity and cold approval. The suffering was carving away the selfish, superficial layers, but what was being revealed wasn't yet the person I hoped for. It was someone pragmatic, hardened by necessity, but her focus was still myopic. She was fighting the symptoms, the debts, the eviction, without yet understanding the disease that had caused them, her own warped values. "Mom, I have an appointment with a buyer downtown tomorrow," she announced one evening, her fingers tracing the outline of her grandmother's emerald bracelet on the kitchen table. "He's offered the best price so far. It's still a low ball, but it's the best we're going to get, without a long, drawn-out process we can't afford." The we again. It was becoming her default, this unconscious conscription of me into her crisis. I simply nodded, my face a mask of resigned support. "Whatever you think is best, dear." The following afternoon, she returned. The change in her was subtle but profound. She moved with less of the frantic energy and more of a weary resolve. She placed a thick envelope on the table between us. It bulged with the physical weight of the money inside. 180,000, she said, her voice flat, devoid of triumph. "I kept your engagement ring and Nana's locket. The rest, it's gone." She didn't cry. She just stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. This money represented the dissolution of her father's final, physical bequest. It was blood money, and she knew it. "Are you all right?" I asked the concerned mother. She shook her head, not in negation, but as if to clear it. It had to be done. "Now, I have to figure out how to use it." She pulled out a folder filled with intimidating-looking letters from banks and collection agencies. "I talked to a free financial advisor at the bank. She said to prioritize the secured debts first, the ones tied to assets, like the loans against the apartment. If those aren't paid, they can lead to immediate foreclosure and worse legal problems." I listened, genuinely impressed despite myself. The woman who had once blithely signed away power of attorney, without reading, it was now meticulously dissecting the fine print of her own financial ruin. Adversity was a brutal teacher, but it was an effective one. She was learning, even if the lessons were being absorbed at a terrifying cost. "That sounds like a wise approach," I said softly. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something beyond desperation in her eyes. I saw a flicker of shame. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry you have to watch this, that you're involved in this mess." "This is your mess, Angela," I said, my voice gentle but firm, drawing a line. "I'm here to support you, but these are decisions you have to make." She flinched slightly, but nodded. "I know, and I will." She squared her shoulders. "I'm going to start making calls tomorrow. I'll pay off the most aggressive of Edward's lenders. It won't clear everything, but it should buy me some time. And I need to find a job." The word hung in the air. Job. For Angela, who had never worked a day in her life after marrying Edward, who had lived off his income and what she thought was her modest inheritance, it was a terrifying prospect. "What kind of job are you looking for?" I asked. "Anything," she said, and the word was a confession of her new reality. "Receptionist, waitress, retail. I have a college degree, but it's in art history. It's not exactly in high demand. And with this cloud hanging over me, my options are limited." That night, after she had gone to bed, I received a call from Mr. Peterson. His voice was crisp with purpose. "Mrs. Brooks, I have important news. We managed to locate Edward." A cold thrill ran through me. "Where is he?" "In Paris, just as your daughter suspected. But here's the interesting part. He's trying to get French residency through a fake marriage with that young woman your daughter mentioned." A fake marriage. It was so tawdry, so predictable. A fake marriage. Yes. Apparently, the girl needs papers, and he needs a way to stay in Europe without being deported. But the most important thing is that we found evidence. We have bank records, emails he foolishly didn't delete. He deliberately falsified your daughter's signature on several loan documents with the clear intention of fleeing the country afterward. This was it, the key. That means Angela can get out of the debts. With this evidence, yes. Mr. Peterson confirmed, a note of professional satisfaction in his voice. We can prove fraud and coercion beyond a reasonable doubt. Your daughter won't be legally responsible for anything Edward did behind her back. It was perfect, flawless. I had in my hands, through Mr. Peterson, the power to absolve her completely, to wipe the slate clean with a wave of my legal wand. But a clean slate was not what she needed. A clean slate would allow her to forget. She needed a slate that was permanently stained with the memory of her mistakes, a reminder she would carry for the rest of her life. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice low and steady. I want you to start the legal process immediately. Gather every piece of evidence, file every necessary motion. I want it airtight. Consider it done. I'll have my team on it first thing in the morning. And Charles, I added, don't tell my daughter anything yet. I don't want a single word of this to reach her. I want the process to be completely finished before she knows. I don't want to give her false hope. There was a pause. I could sense his disapproval warring with his professional duty. Understood, he said finally. This will take about 3 weeks, maybe a month, to do properly. Perfect. I hung up the phone just as Angela came into the kitchen for a glass of water. She looked at me, her face pale in the dim light. Who was that, Mom? It's late. A wrong number, I said without missing a beat. The lies came so easily now, they felt like a second language. A woman asking for a Mrs. Davis. I told her she had the wrong number. Angela nodded, too wrapped in her own troubles to question it. She poured her water and shuffled back to her room, a portrait of defeat. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in controlled dissent. I watched Angela's transformation from up close, a silent witness to her brutal education. The woman who had sold my possessions without a second thought was now learning the value of a single dollar, earned through sheer, unadulterated effort. Her job search was a soul-crushing parade of rejection. Her art history degree was worthless. Her age was a mark against her. And when potential employers dug into her background, the pending legal issues were a definitive red line. She would come home from interviews with her shoulders slumped, the light in her eyes growing dimmer each day. Finally, she landed a job. She told me about it one evening, her voice a monotone. I got a job, Mom. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I infused my voice with a mother's pride. Where? Cleaning offices. At night. For a company that services the buildings downtown. I let the appropriate amount of shock and sympathy show on my face. Angela, are you sure? I have no choice, she said, and this time the phrase wasn't a lament, it was a statement of fact. It pays very little, but it's better than nothing. And I can work at night so I can keep looking for something better during the day. The first night she left for work, I stood at the window and watched her walk to the bus stop in the dark, a small figure swallowed by the shadows. It was a cruel sight, but a necessary one. She was finally facing reality without a safety net, without a husband, without a wealthy mother to bail her out. She was standing on her own 2 feet, even if they were sore and bleeding. When she returned just after dawn, she looked decades older. Her hands were raw, her back ached, and there was a new, profound exhaustion etched into her face. But there was also something else, something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of pride. It was hard, she admitted, sinking into a chair. but not as bad as I thought. The other ladies who worked there, they helped me. One of them, a Mrs. Johnson, taught me tricks to clean more efficiently. Mrs. Johnson? I asked, pouring her a cup of coffee. Yes, she's 60 years old and has been cleaning offices for 20 years. She told me she started after her husband left her with 3 small children. Angela took the mug, her chapped fingers wrapping around the warmth. She said it's not the job she dreamed of, but that it gave her independence and dignity. I felt a genuine pang of respect for this unknown Mrs. Johnson. She sounds like a wise woman. She is. Angela took a sip of coffee. She said something that made me think a lot. She told me there are 2 types of people who end up doing this job. The ones who are there because they never had opportunities, and the ones who are there because they ruined the opportunities they did have. She asked me which group I was in. My breath caught. This was the moment. And what did you tell her? I told her the truth, Angela said, her gaze fixed on some distant point in the room. That I had all the opportunities in the world. A family that loved me. A stable home, an inheritance, and that I ruined it all by following a worthless man. The raw honesty in her voice was staggering. This was no longer a performance for my benefit. This was a genuine confession, wrung from her by exhaustion and the stark camaraderie of the night shift. What did she say? I asked softly. Angela gave a short, humorless laugh. She laughed and said, "Well, honey, then at least you know exactly why you're here. That puts you one step ahead of most people." She looked at me then, her eyes clear for the first time in weeks. "Mom, I want you to know something. These past few weeks have been the hardest of my life, but also the most important. Why? Because I finally understand what really matters." Her voice was firm, convinced. "It's not money. It's not living in the most luxurious apartment. It's not impressing people. It's having people who genuinely love you, who are there when everything falls apart." "Angela, no." I began, the script of the forgiving mother coming automatically to my lips. "Let me finish," she insisted, her voice gaining strength. "You have every right to hate me for what I did to you. I abandoned you when you needed me most. I took everything Dad left you. I treated you as if you were a nuisance. And now I'm here again, expecting you to forgive me and take care of me. I already forgave you, honey. But I haven't forgiven myself," she said, her eyes blazing with a new, fierce determination. "And I won't. Not until I prove that I've truly changed. That I've learned from my mistakes." In that moment, watching her sit in my kitchen with her cleaning-worn hands and her clear, resolute eyes, I knew. The lesson was taking root. She was finally hitting the bedrock of her own character. The money from the jewels was a temporary patch, but this hard-won self-awareness was the foundation of a new life. Mr. Peterson's process was almost complete. The legal salvation was at hand. But as I looked at my daughter, I realized the most important rescue had already begun. She was saving herself. And for the first time since this whole terrible, beautiful plan had begun, I felt a surge of something that wasn't calculation or cold satisfaction. It was hope. The call from Mr. Peterson came on a Tuesday morning, the sky outside a clear, untroubled blue that felt at odds with the seismic shift his words would bring. Angela had just left for a daytime job interview, another futile attempt to escape the night shift, her posture a little straighter, her resolve a little firmer than it had been just a week ago. The house settled into its daytime silence, and I picked up the phone on the second ring, my heart a steady, determined drum. "Mrs. Brooks." His voice was calm, final. "The process is complete. All the evidence has been filed and accepted by the courts. The judgments against your daughter have been vacated. She is legally free and clear of all of Edward's debts. The fraud has been officially recognized. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. It was done. The legal machinery I had set in motion weeks ago had finally ground to its inevitable, successful conclusion. The cage was open. The moment I had been meticulously planning for, waiting for, had arrived. Thank you, Charles. You've done exceptional work. It was my pleasure to secure justice, he replied, and I knew he meant it. Shall I contact your daughter to inform her? No, I said, my voice firm. I want you to organize a meeting at your office. It's time for my daughter to know the whole truth. I hung up and stood in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. This was it, the final act of the performance. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the curtain was about to rise on the truth. I felt a profound calm, the stillness at the eye of the hurricane. There was no more strategy to plan, no more moves to calculate. All that was left was the revelation. When Angela returned an hour later, her face was pinched with the familiar strain of rejection. They said my background check raised flags, she said, slumping into a chair. The legal issues. It's always the legal issues. I placed a cup of tea in front of her. Don't worry about that now, honey. I've made an appointment for us with a lawyer, a Mr. Peterson. He might be able to help with your situation. Her head snapped up, fear and a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes. A lawyer? Mom, I told you, I can't afford a lawyer. I barely have enough to cover my share of the groceries this week. Don't worry about the cost, I said, my voice soothing. Let's just hear what he has to say. She agreed, her resistance worn away by exhaustion and the sheer weight of her problems. The following morning, we dressed in silence. Angela put on the best of her now limited wardrobe, a simple navy dress that hung loosely on her thinner frame. I chose my wine-colored dress, the one Robert had loved. It was my armor. Mr. Peterson's office, and felt different this time. The marble floors and dark wood were no longer just a backdrop for my secret plans, they were the setting for their unveiling. Angela was visibly nervous, wringing her hands as we were ushered into his spacious office. Mrs. Brooks, Miss Brooks, Mr. Peterson greeted us, his demeanor professionally neutral. Thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing us, Angela said quickly, her voice tight with anxiety. Although I should warn you, my financial situation is very complicated, and I probably can't afford high fees. That's exactly what we're going to talk about, Mr. Peterson said, his gaze meeting mine for a split second before returning to her. But first, I need you to review these documents. He handed her a thick folder. She opened it with trembling hands and began to read. I watched her face, a lifetime of motherhood allowing me to read every subtle shift. Confusion first, as her eyes scanned the legal jargon. Then, a furrowing of her brow as she began to understand. Her head shook slightly, a silent no. Then, her eyes widened, flying over the words again, faster now, disbelief warring with dawning comprehension. I don't understand, she stammered, looking from the papers to Mr. Peterson and then to me. These documents say that Edward forged my signature, that there is evidence of fraud, that I am not responsible for the debts. That's correct, Mr. Peterson said calmly. We have been investigating your case for the past few weeks. We found incontrovertible evidence that you were a victim of identity fraud and coercion. But how is that possible? She breathed, her knuckles white where she gripped the folder. Who paid for this investigation? I don't have money for this. Mr. Peterson looked at me. It was my moment. Angela, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the hushed room. There's something I need to tell you. Her eyes, wide and bewildered, locked onto mine. What, Mom? I took a deep breath, the last breath of the woman I had been pretending to be. Your father left me more than you knew, much more. The confusion on her face deepened. What do you mean? Mr. Peterson, I said, my gaze never leaving my daughter's. Show her the other documents. He took out a second, even thicker folder and placed it on the desk in front of Angela. She looked at it, then at me, a terrible suspicion beginning to cloud her features. Slowly, she opened it. This folder contained the deeds, the bank statements with numbers that stretched into the millions, the investment certificates, the corporate documents for Robert Investments, Incorporated, the complete, unvarnished truth of the fortune Robert had built. She read in silence for what felt like an eternity. Her face went pale, then flushed. Her hands began to shake so violently the papers rattled. She saw the deed for the Bayview Apartments. She saw the bank balances. She saw the list of properties, the motel, the condo, the other houses. With each document, another piece of the world she thought she knew shattered. Mom, she whispered, her voice hoarse. This says you are the owner of the building where I lived. Yes. And that you have other properties, bank accounts. Investments. Yes. This means, she looked up, her eyes blazing with a hurt so profound it seemed to radiate from her. This means that when I sold the beach house, it was my house and the sale was fraudulent. I already got it back. The words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. She stared at the papers, her mind visibly reeling, trying to reorient her entire reality around this new, shocking information. How long? She finally asked, her voice a broken whisper. How long have you known this? Since the day you called me from the doctor's office. The air left her lungs in a sharp gasp. She leaned back in her chair as if I had struck her. You knew all this when I came back from Europe, asking for help? Yes, you knew. You could solve all my problems when you saw me crying every night? When you saw me selling Nana's jewels? When you watched me leave to clean offices at night? Every question was an accusation, laced with a betrayal that mirrored my own. Yes, there was a long, tense silence. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. Angela closed the folders with a slow, deliberate finality and looked directly into my eyes. The hurt in her gaze was being rapidly replaced by a cold, clear anger. Why, Mom? The question was a blade. Why did you let me suffer when you could have helped me? This was the question I had been waiting for. The core of my entire plan. I met her gaze, my own steady and unwavering. Because you needed to learn something, you couldn't learn any other way. What? She spat, the word sharp with venom. You needed to learn the value of the things you had lost, I said, my voice low and intense, every word chosen with care. The value of family, of respect, of responsibility. When you abandoned me, it wasn't just money you took from me, Angela. It was my dignity. It was love. It was trust. You needed to understand what it truly feels like to have those things stripped away. If I had simply written a check, you would have learned that there's always a safety net, that money can erase any mistake. You would have felt relieved, but you wouldn't have been changed. I didn't want to just save you from your circumstances. I wanted to save you from yourself. Angela started to cry, but they weren't the tears of self-pity I had grown accustomed to. They were tears of a deep, shattering understanding. They were the tears of someone finally seeing their own reflection clearly for the first time and being horrified by what they saw. I abandoned you when you needed me most. She whispered, the words a confession. Yes. I treated you like garbage. Yes. And you saved me anyway. Yes, I said softly, but not in the way you expected. I didn't save you by giving you money so you could keep making the same mistakes. I saved you by letting you hit rock bottom so you could learn to save yourself. Mr. Peterson discreetly intervened, his voice a calm anchor in the storm of our emotions. Miss Brooks, your mother has paid all the legal expenses to free you from Edward's debts. She has also recovered all the properties that were sold fraudulently. You are completely free of legal and financial problems. Angela wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her movements jerky. And the cleaning job I got? You can quit if you want, I said, but I hope you don't. Why? She asked, her voice raw. Because that job is teaching you something you never learned when everything was easy. It's teaching you the value of your own effort, the dignity of honest work, the importance of valuing every dollar you earn. She was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. The anger was gone, replaced by a dazed, overwhelming comprehension. Mr. Peterson quietly excused himself, leaving us alone in the office. Angela looked at me, her expression stripped bare of all its defenses. Do you forgive me, Mom? I forgave you a long time ago, honey. I said, and for the first time, the words were completely, utterly true. The weight of my own resentment had finally lifted. The question is, can you forgive yourself? She shook her head slowly, fresh tears spilling over. I don't know if I can. I did unforgivable things. People make mistakes, Angela, I said, reaching across the desk and taking her cold hand in mine. The important thing is what we do after we recognize those mistakes. We sat in the silence of the opulent office, two women surrounded by the evidence of a hidden fortune, but focused only on the emotional landscape between us. The mother and the daughter were gone. In their place were two women, scarred and weathered, looking at each other across a chasm that was finally, slowly, beginning to close. I want you to know something, Angela said, her voice firmer now. Even if you didn't have all this money, even if you were really the poor widow I thought you were, I would have learned the same lesson. What lesson? That there is nothing more valuable than having someone who loves you unconditionally. She squeezed my hand. During these past few weeks, the only thing that kept me sane was knowing I had a home with you. That no matter how much I had ruined my life, you were still my mother. That will never change, Angela. I know, she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. But I also know that I can never take that love for granted again. I have to earn it every day, with respect, with gratitude, with actions, not just words. We left Mr. Peterson's office arm in arm, the bright sunlight of the outside world feeling like a baptism. We were no longer mother and daughter bound by blood and habit. We were two women who had chosen each other, after passing through the fire. The performance was over. The truth was out. And for the first time since Robert's death, I felt our family was not just a memory, but a living, breathing thing again, reforged in the crucible of pain and built on a foundation that no crisis could ever destroy. The air outside Mr. Peterson's office felt different in my lungs, cleaner, lighter, as if a poison I had been breathing for months had finally been purged. The weight of the secret was gone. The performance was over. Angela walked beside me, her arm linked through mine, not in a gesture of need, but one of solidarity. We were two women, walking in silence, our world fundamentally rearranged. The city noise, which usually felt like an assault, was now just a backdrop to the quiet revolution happening between us. We didn't speak on the way home. There were no words big enough yet to bridge the chasm that had just been crossed. The bus ride was a silent, shared processing of the seismic truth. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She wasn't crying, she wasn't angry, she was simply absorbing. Staring out the window at a city she now knew her mother owned a significant piece of, her expression one of profound, almost reverent contemplation. When we arrived home, the familiar walls of our house seemed to hold a new meaning. It was no longer just my refuge or her pit stop, it was our shared ground, the place where the old relationship had died and something new was struggling to be born. Angela went straight to the kitchen and put the kettle on, a simple, domestic act that felt more significant than any dramatic declaration. She moved with a new certainty. Her shoulders no longer slumped under the weight of a secret she didn't know she was carrying. "I'm going to keep the job, Mom," she said, her back to me as she took down 2 mugs. Her voice was calm, resolved. I leaned against the door frame. "Are you sure? You don't have to punish yourself." She turned. A wry, genuine smile on her face, the first one I had seen in what felt like a lifetime. "It's not a punishment. It's a way of remembering who I was and who I want to be now. Mrs. Johnson was right. Knowing why you're there, it changes everything. It's not just a job, it's my choice." In that moment, I saw the woman she was becoming. Not the spoiled daughter, not the broken victim, but someone who had found a core of strength in the rubble of her own making. She was choosing the hard path not because she had to, but because she needed to. The distinction was everything. "Okay," I said, simply. It was her decision to make. That afternoon, I knew it was time for another confession. Aurora had been a steadfast, if unwitting, accomplice in my performance, and she deserved the truth. I invited her over for tea, and when she sat in her usual spot at my kitchen table, I poured the tea and took a deep breath. "Aurora," I began, "there's something I need to tell you." Her eyes, always so perceptive, narrowed slightly. "I had a feeling, Antonia. The rumors, they were getting strange. People saw Angela at the lawyer's office. They saw her at the bank, not looking desperate, but looking resolved." "The rumors are true," I said, meeting her gaze. "I haven't been entirely honest with you. I told her everything. Not just the money, but the plan. The phone call, the envelope, my silent revenge, the weeks of watching Angela struggle, and finally, the revelation in Mr. Peterson's office. I laid my soul bare to my oldest friend." When I finished, Aurora was silent for a long time, stirring her tea absently. Finally, she looked up, and her expression was not one of judgment, but of awe. "Antonia," she said slowly, that is brilliant and terrible at the same time." "Terrible?" I asked, bracing myself. "Yes, terrible," she said, her voice soft. "Because you let your own daughter suffer when you could have helped her immediately." She held up a hand to stop my protest. "But also brilliant, because I understand why you did it. Angela needed to learn the value of the things she had lost. If you had simply given her money, she would have learned that there's always someone who will rescue her from the consequences of her bad decisions." Relief washed over me. She understood. "Exactly. But Antonia," she leaned forward, her eyes searching mine, "didn't it hurt you to see her suffer every day?" "Every day," I confessed, the memory of those nights a sharp pain even now. Every night I saw her crying. Every morning I saw her get up to go to work, tired and defeated. But I knew that if I rescued her too soon, she wouldn't have learned the full lesson. "And do you think she learned it?" Aurora asked, gesturing vaguely toward the living room where Angela was studying. "Look for yourself," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips. "Angela knows that she now has access to enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life, but she chose to keep her job. She knows she can move to a better place, but she decided to stay here with me. She knows she doesn't have to worry about the debts, but she's using her own savings to help other women in similar situations." Aurora's eyebrows shot up. "She's helping other women?" "Yes. She became friends with the ladies she works with. She found out one of them, a single mother, is having trouble paying for her son's daycare. Angela is using the money from her paychecks to help her. Not alone, A gift. Aurora sat back, a slow, deep smile spreading across her face. That is not the Angela who went to Europe. No, I agreed, my heart swelling with a pride I didn't have to fake. This Angela understands that money is a tool, not a goal. She understands that dignity comes from work and respect, not from material possessions. That night, when Angela returned from her cleaning shift, she found me reading in the living room. She didn't slink in, defeated. She walked in, tired but upright, and sat beside me on the sofa. "Mom, I have to tell you something," she said, pulling off her work shoes. "Today, Mrs. Johnson asked me if I was the daughter of the rich lady from the north side of town." My heart skipped a beat. "What did you tell her?" I said yes. "That you have enough money for me not to have to work." She looked at me, her eyes clear and honest. And do you know what she asked me next? What? She asked me why I was still working. Angela gave a soft laugh. So I explained that it was because I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own 2 feet. And what did she say? She laughed and said, "Honey, that's the difference between being rich and acting rich. Your mom taught you how to be truly rich." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. Mrs. Johnson, a woman I had never met, had seen right to this part of it all. "She is very wise," I managed to say. "She is," Angela agreed. "And she made me understand something important. It's not about the money you have, but about how you use it and how you relate to it." She shifted on the sofa to face me fully. "Mom, I've made a decision. I'm going to keep living here with you, but not as a daughter who has come back home to her parents. I want to stay here as a grown woman who chooses to share her life with her mother." "What's the difference?" I asked, though I thought I already knew. "The difference is that I'm going to pay my share of the expenses. I'm going to contribute to the upkeep of the house. And I'm going to treat this relationship as a partnership between 2 independent women who love and respect each other." "Angela, you don't need to." "Yes, I do, Mom," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "I need our relationship to be different from what it was before. Before, I was a daughter who took her mother's love and care for granted. Now, I want to be a grown woman who values and takes care of the most important relationship in her life." "And your job?" I asked. "I'm going to keep working, but not necessarily cleaning offices forever. I want to go back to school." Her eyes lit up with a passion I hadn't seen in years. "I want to study social work. These past few weeks have taught me how many people are going through difficult situations without having anyone to support them. I want to use the resources we have, the real resources of experience and empathy, to help other women who are going through what I went through." It was perfect. More perfect than any revenge fantasy I had ever concocted. She had not only learned to value what she had, but she had found a way to transmute her pain into purpose. My plan, which had begun in a cold, dark place of betrayal, had somehow led us here, to this moment of luminous, shared understanding. "I think that's a beautiful idea, honey," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And what about Edward?" I ventured, the last loose thread. "Mr. Peterson told me he was arrested in France for the fraudulent marriage. He's going to be deported soon." She shrugged, a gesture of true final dismissal. "But honestly, Mom, I don't care anymore. That part of my life is over." "You don't feel any resentment?" "No," she said, and I knew she meant it. "Edward did me a favor without even knowing it. If he hadn't abandoned and betrayed me, I never would have hit rock bottom. And if I had never hit rock bottom, I never would have learned to truly value what I have." That night, for the first time since Robert's death, I went to bed completely at peace. The war was over. The victory was not in the reclaiming of property, but in the reclamation of a soul. My daughter was saved, and she had done most of the saving herself. Robert would have been so proud. A year to the day after Angela's devastating phone call, we stood together on the porch of the beach house. But it was no longer just our beach house. A discreet, hand-carved sign was now mounted by the front steps, reading Robert's Harbor, a sanctuary for new beginnings. The air was no longer heavy with the ghosts of a broken past, but electric with the promise of a mended future. The cream-colored cottage, with its wraparound porch facing the endless ocean, was ready to fulfill its new purpose. We had spent the spring and summer preparing. The house was the same, yet profoundly different. The furniture was rearranged to create more space and light. The bedrooms were made up with fresh, simple linens, each with a small, welcoming bouquet of wildflowers from the garden. We had turned Robert's old study into a quiet reading nook and stocked the shelves with books on resilience, legal rights, and starting over. It was still a home, but now it was a home meant to be shared, a temporary anchor for women who had been cast adrift. The first resident was arriving today. Her name was Maria, and her story, which Angela had shared with me in careful, professional confidence, was a familiar echo of pain, a controlling husband, financial isolation, the slow erosion of self. Angela, now officially enrolled in her master's program and working part-time at a women's shelter, had handled the entire intake process herself. She was no longer the beneficiary of this sanctuary, she was its steward. Nervous? I asked, my hand resting on the sun-warmed railing Robert had built. Angela, dressed in simple, practical clothes, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, shook her head. A serene smile graced her lips. No, not nervous. It feels right. This is what this house was always meant for, I think. We just didn't know it. I looked at my daughter, truly seeing the woman she had become. The journey had carved away the superficial, leaving behind a person of immense strength, compassion, and quiet grace. The inheritance she valued now wasn't the one in the bank. It was the inheritance of empathy, the legacy of a second chance, passed from her father's foresight and her mother's difficult love, directly into her own capable hands. A small, modest car pulled into the driveway. A woman with wary eyes and a posture that seemed to fold in on itself got out, clutching a single, worn duffel bag. This was Maria. Angela didn't rush forward. She simply walked down the porch steps, her movements calm and open. "Maria?" she said, her voice warm and devoid of pity. "I'm Angela. Welcome. We're so glad you're here." I watched from the porch as Angela led Maria inside, pointing out the kitchen, the living room, her bedroom. I saw Angela's hand gently touch Maria's arm, a gesture of solidarity, not condescension. I saw Maria's shoulders, so tight with fear, begin to relax by a fraction of an inch. This was the final, perfect picture. This was the culmination of it all. The beach house, once a symbol of everything that had been stolen, was now a place of giving. The daughter, who had once taken so callously, was now giving so generously. And the mother, who had orchestrated a lesson in loss, was now witnessing a masterclass in redemption. I stayed on the porch as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. The waves crashed their eternal rhythm, a sound that had witnessed both our family's greatest joy and its deepest pain, and now its most profound healing. I didn't need to speak to Robert anymore. I could feel him in the solid planks beneath my feet, in the salt-kissed air, in the determined kindness of our daughter. He was here. He had always been here. Angela joined me later, after she had settled Maria in with a cup of tea and the assurance that she was safe. "She's sleeping," Angela said softly, coming to stand beside me. "She cried for a while, and then she just slept." We stood in silence, watching the ocean swallow the last sliver of the Sunday. "You did a good thing today, Angela," I said. "Your father would be so proud of the woman you are." "He'd be proud of both of us, Mom," she replied, slipping her arm through mine. "He'd be proud of the family we built. Not from blood, but from choice. From forgiveness." The story that had begun with an ending of trust. An ending of a relationship, an ending of a life as I knew it had now found its true beginning. The final page wasn't about reclaiming a house or a fortune, it was about building a harbor. And as I stood there with my daughter, watching the first star appear in the twilight sky, I knew that our work, our love, would now become a lighthouse for others lost in their own storms. The circle was not just closed, it was expanded, wide enough to let the whole world in. 5 years later, the rhythm of our lives had settled into a symphony so harmonious, its melody was felt more than heard. It was in the quiet hum of the Foundation's office downtown, in the laughter that now echoed freely through the halls of my house, and in the profound, unspoken understanding that flowed between Angela and me. The dramatic crescendos of betrayal and revelation were a part of our history, yes, but they had given way to a beautiful, sustained movement of purpose and peace. Robert's Harbor had flourished beyond my wildest dreams. What began as a single beach house had grown into a small network of 3 safe houses, supported by an endowment that ensured their operation in perpetuity. Angela, now a licensed clinical social worker, was the heart and soul of the organization. She didn't just manage it, she infused it with the hard-won wisdom of her own journey. She knew when a woman needed practical advice on opening a bank account, and when she simply needed someone to sit with her in silence, holding space for her grief. I had found my role too. I was the keeper of the stories, the gentle hand on the tiller. I used my understanding of assets and investments, the very knowledge Robert had left me, not to amass more wealth, but to carefully, wisely, grow the Foundation's resources. I met with accountants and lawyers, but the conversations were no longer about secret plots or legal reclamations. They were about sustainability, about ensuring that this harbor would remain open for generations of women to come. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the garden of the original beach house, now known as the Anchor. I was helping a young woman named Liza, one of our current residents, plant a vegetable patch. Her hands, once hesitant and frail, were now growing strong and steady as she worked the dark soil. We were companionably silent, the sun warm on our backs. Angela's car pulled up, and she got out, not with the weary exhaustion of her past, but with the vibrant energy of a woman fully in her element. She walked over, kissed my cheek, and knelt beside Liza. "The tomatoes are looking strong, Liza," she said, her voice warm and encouraging. Liza looked up, a genuine, unforced smile on her face. "Thanks, Angela. Your mom's been teaching me." I watched them, my heart so full it felt like a physical presence in my chest. This was the true wealth. This connection. This simple, profound act of helping another person find their footing. The millions in the bank were a tool, but this was the legacy. That evening, Angela and I sat on the porch, just as we had so many times before. The sky was a deep, velvety blue, the first stars beginning to shimmer. "I got a call from the university today," Angela said, sipping her iced tea. "They want me to teach a seminar next semester on financial empowerment and trauma recovery." "Angela, that's wonderful," I exclaimed. "They couldn't have chosen a better person." "It's because of you, Mom," she said, her gaze soft and direct. "Everything I teach, everything I am in that work, it's built on the lesson you taught me. That true empowerment doesn't come from a handout, it comes from reclaiming your own agency. You taught me that the hardest way possible, and it's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." There were no longer tears in these moments of recognition, only a deep, settled gratitude. The past was not a wound to be picked at, but a foundation to be built upon. "Do you ever think about what would have happened?" she asked after a comfortable silence. If you had just given me the money, if you had confronted me directly? I looked out at the dark, rolling ocean. I think about it sometimes, I admitted. I think we would have had a loud, dramatic fight. You would have been angry and defensive. You might have even paid me back and walked away, convinced I was a miserly old woman. The money would have been returned, but we would have lost each other forever, and you. I turned to her. You would never have become you, the real you. She nodded, understanding completely. I would have stayed the same shallow person, just with a temporarily solved problem. Edward's betrayal would have broken me. Instead, she spread her hands, gesturing to the house, the garden, the invisible network of lives she was touching. It became the catalyst for everything. We sat until the moon rose, a silver coin in the vast, star-dusted sky. The symphony of our new life played on the crash of the waves, the chirp of the crickets, the quiet beat of two hearts, perfectly in tune. The next morning, I walked through the house, my hands skimming over the familiar surfaces. I stopped before the large family photo in the hallway, the one of a laughing Angela on Robert's lap. For years, that photo had been a source of almost unbearable pain. Now, I saw it for what it was, a beginning, not an end. The love in that picture hadn't died. It had simply been tested, refined, and reborn into something stronger and more resilient than we could have ever imagined. Justice had not been a punishment. It had been a restoration, a healing. The story that began with an ending had, in truth, been the start of everything. 10 years. A decade since the phone call that shattered my world and set in motion a chain of events I could never have predicted. I sit now on the same porch, where I once sat with a broken heart, but the woman in this chair is a stranger to that grief-stricken widow. The sea continues its eternal dance, a constant witness to the fleeting dramas of human lives. And I feel a part of its rhythm now, no longer a tempest-tossed ship, but a steady, weathered headland. Our lives, Angela's and mine, have woven themselves into a tapestry so rich and complex that the dark threads of betrayal are no longer stark flaws, but essential parts of the pattern, giving depth and contrast to the brighter hues of redemption and joy. Robert's Harbor is a thriving institution, a quiet force for good in the city. We don't put our names on plaques. Our legacy is in the quiet confidence of the women who pass through our doors, in the children who get to grow up in homes free from fear. Angela is the executive director now. She is a force of nature, respected, compassionate, and fiercely intelligent. The university seminar she taught blossomed into a full-fledged program, and she is regularly invited to speak at conferences. The most poignant part? She never mentions our personal story in her public talks. She protects it, cherishes it as the sacred, painful, private crucible that forged her. She uses the lessons, not the details. That, more than anything, tells me the lesson was truly learned. It is integrated into her soul, not paraded as an anecdote. She married again, 2 years ago. His name is David, a history teacher with kind eyes and a laugh that rumbles from his chest. He loves her not for what she has, but for who she is, a woman of substance, of scars, of immense strength. He looks at her the way Robert used to look at me. At their wedding, as I watched them dance, I felt Robert's presence not as a ghost, but as a blessing. He had ensured his daughter would find her way to a love that was real, a love that would build her up, not break her down. I am a grandmother now. Their daughter, little Antonia, but we call her Tony, is 2 years old. She has Robert's thoughtful eyes and Angela's defiant spirit. When I hold her, smelling the sweet, powdery scent of her skin, I feel the circle of my life click into place with a profound, peaceful finality. All the pain, all the struggle, it all led here. To this moment, to this child who will grow up, knowing nothing of the storms that came before, but will be surrounded by the unshakable love those storms ultimately forged. I still manage the foundation's assets, my afternoons spent in quiet study of markets and investments, a silent conversation with the mite husband who taught me how. But my greatest joy comes in the mornings, when I take Tony down to the beach at the harbor. We build sandcastles at the very spot where her mother once learned to swim. We collect seashells, and I tell her stories about her grandfather, the real stories, not of his secret fortune, but of his quiet courage, his unwavering love, his Sunday morning coffee rituals. The other day, Angela found us there. She stood for a moment, watching us, a soft smile on her face. She came and sat beside me on the sand, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You're telling her about Dad," she said, not a question, but a statement. "I am," I said, my hand resting on Tony's warm back as she diligently patted a lopsided tower. "She should know where she comes from." Angela rested her head on my shoulder, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated love. "She knows, Mom. She knows every time you look at her. She knows in the way this house is always open. She knows in the way you look at David and me." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper meant just for me. "She knows because of the woman you are, and the woman you helped me become." We sat there, the 3 generations of us, watching the waves roll in. The past was a closed book, its lessons learned, its wounds healed into scars that no longer ached, but served as reminders of our resilience. The future was Tony's, bright and full of promise. And the present was this perfect, suspended moment of contentment. The game was over, the cards were put away. The performance had long since ended, and the actors had shed their costumes to reveal their true, stronger selves beneath. There was no more strategy, no more calculation, only the simple, profound act of living a life built on truth and love. Justice, I had learned, was not a destination you arrived at with a legal decree or a reclaimed deed. It was a state of being. It was the peace that settled in your soul when you knew you had done the right thing, for the right reasons, no matter how hard it had been. It was the sound of your daughter's laughter in your home. It was the weight of your granddaughter sleeping trustfully in your arms. It was the whisper of the ocean, a constant reminder that even the most violent storms eventually subside, leaving the air clearer and the horizon brighter than before. My story is done. It is a story of a beach house, a hidden fortune, and a mother's love that was strong enough to be cruel to be kind. But more than that, it is a story of transformation. Of how 2 women, broken by betrayal, picked up the pieces and together built a mosaic far more beautiful than the original picture had ever been. And as the sun sets on this decade, painting the sky in a final, glorious blaze of color, I smile. I have kept my promise to Robert. I have taken care of our daughter. And in doing so, I found I had also taken care of myself. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.